Welcome back to another video. This week, I'm Gareth from Park Cameras, as I am every single week. And why not grab yourself a nice drink, maybe a snack? I have no problem with that whatsoever, because this week we're going to dive into Lightroom together. We're going to edit a photo. It's a photo I'm actually really pleased with, but it took a little bit of work to get to the end result. We're going to see how we did it. Let's do it together. It's Tutorial Tuesday. Welcome back to Tutorial Tuesday, where each and every Tuesday we bring a brand new, fresh photography tutorial. This week we're going to dive into Lightroom. We're going to edit a photo together. It's a photo that, like I said in the intro, I'm very pleased with. It was taken on the Samyang 135mm lens, which is a lovely lens to shoot with. It's a landscape photo, which I actually love shooting at those longer focal lengths. We're going to edit it together because I'm really happy with what I did with the photo. We're going to go through how I did that. Maybe it'll come out slightly differently, but it took a little bit of work to get there. So let's dive in. I've got this photo here. Like I said, taken on the 135, which is why it's got this nice kind of depth of field in the front. I like kind of how it pushes past this grass in the foreground. We've got that nice kind of path there as the focal point of the image, which I really like. The sky is a little bit blown out. Now, I deliberately exposed it a little bit high just because I wanted to get more detail in this grass, and I feel like we can probably pull it back and we can work with it a little bit as well. So let's go ahead and start editing. So the first thing I'm going to do is actually just bring up the contrast a little bit and then bring down those highlights. Now that's going to hopefully pull back some detail in the sky, it certainly is, but we have still got a bit of a problem up in the top left with a little bit of overexposure. It's a little bit blown out. I'm going to leave the shadows and the whites and the blacks where they are for now, but we might come back to those a little bit later. For now, let's bring the clarity up a little bit and the vibrance. And I think I'm pretty happy with the overall feel so far. We do just need to do some work on that sky. So we're going to stick with kind of the global edits for now. I'm going to come to some local edits a little bit later, which we'll use things like masks for. And it might be that we even have to go into Photoshop and do some work there as well. But for now, I'm happy with the kind of global contrasty exposure levels of this. We might come down to the tone curve a bit later and add something in there, but what I want to do is warm this up a little bit because it was taken at sunset. You can see the sun over in the left here. So I want to bring some more kind of warm tones in here by just bringing the color temperature into the warmer area. I think that looks quite nice, and I might just add a little bit of magenta. Now, I actually used to really like adding magenta into images, but now I'm not so keen. So I'm always careful not to add too much, but I do just want to kind of give this more of a sunset feel, and I think that looks quite nice. Now, the next way we can do that, and the easiest way really, I want to pull some of these yellows. There's a lot of yellow here, and I want to pull that down to more of an orange. So in the Hue, Saturation, and Luminance tab, we're going to bring the yellow down towards the orange here. Let's bring the oranges down a little bit as well. And the greens towards the yellow, just to kind of really warm this up. Now the blues, I don't think we've got a lot of blue here, but I'll just pop it a little bit towards the aqua. And in the luminance, I'll just bring the blue down. Again, I don't think it's going to do a huge amount. Let's bring the yellow down a touch as well, just see what happens there. In the color grading here, we could add some orange into the highlights, into the mid-tones. That would really warm this up. Let's see what that looks like, but it's something we can always take out if we don't like it. So we're starting with the mid-tones here. I'm just adding a little bit of orange in there. Same with the highlights. Now I'd often then contrast that with a little bit of blue in the shadows, but I think for this one, I'm gonna leave it. And I might even turn this color grading off later on. We're going to see where that kind of ends up. Let's add the red primary. Let's bring that over to the orange a little bit and the blue primary towards the kind of teal. And I'm quite happy with how this is looking. Now, something that's interesting with editing and the way that I do photo editing is I tend to take things a little bit further. So in this case, this is probably a bit warmer than I will end with. But I like to do that and then maybe pull it back a little bit because I like to see where those kind of limits are and where we want to end up by going a little bit further down the road and then doubling back. So it's getting a little bit metaphor-y now. But I like where this is so far. I think we need to do some sort of basic masking to add in some things to work with this sky as well. So let's come up here to the masking. Let's start with a linear gradient. Now I'm going to bring that in from the top left here. This is going to be kind of our sunlight. So a little bit of an exposure bump. I'm going to bring that dehaze down a little bit and then just have that kind of spread over the image like so. If I turn that off and then back on, you can see how much that adds to the photo. It's a lot. It's a lot. Now we can go new mask. Let's go ahead and select the sky, I think. So this is a new-ish feature in Lightroom where Lightroom, as you can see, has just masked out the sky very, very nicely, which means that we can actually affect the sky just by itself without having to use something like a linear gradient, which is also a useful tool, but in this case, I want to affect the whole sky and just the sky, and very precisely, which is what we're going to do. So we can now bring the exposure down. Let's bring the highlights down as well. Again, we don't want to go too far because otherwise it can start to look a bit strange that, you know, the sky is such a different, clearly different exposure to the rest of the photo. So we might have to do some more interesting things to get around this kind of issue we've got with this top left part of the image, which is bothering me slightly. So before we do that, I do want to just come in and crop this photo, I think. Let's go ahead and hit the crop tool, and I want to pop this in 16:9. I just feel like the image works really well as a nice wide image like that. I'm going to just pop this top part of the hill here on the top line of the rule of thirds, because I think that looks good. And I think that looks really nice. I think that's absolutely fine. So next up, I want to come in, I want to make a radial gradient, and I'm just going to pop this over the path. And what I'm going to do is just up the exposure there. I want that path to pop. I want it to be one of the more kind of visual landmarks in the image. I want this to be the anchor point, and I just want to make sure it's not lost in the rest of the landscape. We could even come in here, do another radial gradient. Let's see what this looks like. So sometimes some of this is trial and error. I'm going to do a bigger one, and I'm going to invert it. Now that means that we're affecting everything outside of this circle. I'm just going to bring that exposure down a touch, just to really pinpoint that path as the kind of focal point of the image. Okay, so I think this is looking really nice. We've got some nice kind of contrast, nice shadow and light areas. But I think I am going to take this into Photoshop. So let's right click, edit in, and Adobe Photoshop. And the reason for that is I want to address that sky, and I think Photoshop is going to be the easiest way to do that. We're going to be able to not necessarily do a full sky replacement, but there's a few ways that we can help to correct that part of the sky that is a little bit blown out. Now, here we are, we've opened the image in Photoshop. It's just the layer opened by itself. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the lock or the padlock to unlock that layer. I'm going to press Ctrl J. That's going to duplicate the layer. So we've always got the backup copy right at the bottom of our edit here. So I'm going to select this top layer. I'm going to come up to Edit and Sky Replacement. Now that is going to allow Photoshop to select the sky, much like we saw in Lightroom, but we're going to be able to change it to a new sky. Now, Photoshop is automatically selecting the last sky I was playing around with, which is actually the sky that I want to use for this image. But if you click this drop-down menu, there are loads of skies actually just within Photoshop that you can use for yourself. So first things first, I want to address some of the things with this sky. I want to brighten it up a little bit so we can change some of these sliders. I want to warm it up a little bit as well. I'm just going to bring up the brightness so that it kind of matches the landscape we've got here. I'm also going to address these. So let's go ahead and bring the foreground lighting, edge lighting, and color adjustment all the way up to 100. That allows Photoshop to actually just adjust some of the aspects of this foreground of our photo here to try and match with the sky. I'm going to press OK, and it's going to put all of that into new layers, and it's going to put it into a group called Sky Replacement Group. So I can turn that off. You can see our sky, and then turn it back on. You can see Photoshop sky there as well. Now, I think that looks pretty cool, but it now is verging into more of an art piece rather than a photo piece. So what can we do to fix that? Well, actually, it's really, really easy. So because Photoshop puts all of these elements of the new sky into a group, we can just select the group here, come down and click Create Layer Mask, which allows us to then mask this out very easily. So you can see the layer mask here is all white. That means everything is revealed. Anything in black on the layer mask will be hidden. Anything in white is revealed. So all revealed is all white, and we can paint with black using the paintbrush onto the sky, as you can see here, to bring in our old sky, or rather to hide this particular layer. So we're masking it out. I'm gonna press Ctrl Z to get rid of that. Let's bring our flow down. We're about 30%. Let's bring it to 25%. That means that we're building up as we paint. So we can paint on and paint on and paint on to build up the opacity of what we're doing. And what I essentially want to do is bring back in as much of our sky as we can. So let's start over here. And I'm just sort of clicking here a little bit to add in our sky, which I think looks good. But we've got a little bit of this other sky here that we brought in. Now, if I press X, I can switch back to white, and I can bring in some of the other sky kind of around these clouds. And I think mixing them together like this can actually look really good. Let's bring in a little bit more over this cloud as if the sun is kind of pushing through. And I think that looks much, much better. If we turn off that extra bit of sky, you can see it's not a huge amount, but it just gets rid of that kind of blown out bit of sky. Now, I think that's a really nice way of using this sky replacement. We've just replaced a little bit. We've masked things out. So we've still got the majority of our sky there, but I like the end result of where we end up using that. Now, something we might want to do to marry all the elements together, let's come down here to the adjustment layer. Let's do a new adjustment layer, color lookup. That allows us to add a LUT to the image, which is a lookup table, which changes things like colors and contrast and stuff like that. If we apply that to the whole image now, it's really going to help to marry everything together really, really nicely. So one that I really like and I think will work well for this particular photo is the crisp, warm look. Now, at 100%, this is really intense. So let's bring that down. We can just bring the opacity down. Let's go to something like 32%. Let's see what that looks like. Let's turn it off and back on. I think that's looking pretty nice, actually. We could even come down a little bit more. Maybe let's go something like 28%. Turn that off, turn that back on. You know what? Let's bring it up a little bit. It's very contrasty, but I don't mind it. I don't mind it. Now we can go ahead and press Control S. That's going to save this as it is. And we can go back to Lightroom and it'll be there. So if we just close this, it's now in Lightroom as a TIFF file, which means it's still pretty malleable. We can still do things to it. You know, we could still bring the highlights down. We could bring the shadows up a little bit if we wanted to. There's a lot that we can do here. I like it as it is. We might want to just bring those shadows up a tiny bit and bring the overall exposure down just a touch, And I think that actually looks really, really nice. Now, let's go ahead and compare this to where we started. So this is where we started, and then this is where we've got to. Quite a dramatic difference. Quite a lot has changed here, but I like the look of the image. I like the coloring. I like the contrast level, and I think we successfully fixed that bit of sky. I think, you know, we could have used a different kind of sky. We could have used, you know, less or more. We could have gone for a full sky replacement with something that looks a little bit more realistic to the scene. But I like keeping in as much of our sky as we possibly can, but just fixing some of the issues that we had there. I'm really happy with the end result. Now, I'd love to hear, where would you have stopped? Would you have done the sky replacement? Would you have gone further? I like taking things a little bit far and then pulling them back a little bit. So I'd love to hear your thoughts. Where would you stop? Where would you go to? And is there anything else you would have done to change up the image? Of course, you can check out a full list of all the equipment used for this photo, for this video, all the stuff down in the description. Lovely lens, that Samyang 135, so definitely worth checking out. I will see you in the next video. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoyed as well. There's new content all the time, every single week. But until the next video, all that's left for me to say is, as always, thanks for watching.